At this point, a lot of people get stuck on deceptively small questions like, what actually counts as already collected? Because if you answer that question narrowly, you accidentally erase a lot of thinking you've already done. And if you answer it too loosely, everything turns into a vague pile that doesn't help you later. So here, we're going to be thinking about getting that definition right. Not in an abstract way, but in a way that actually supports analysis. I'm Nick. This is Dr. Cranky Pants Teaches, and we need to figure out how to make our collections actually useful. So let's start by naming the most common misunderstanding, because collected does not mean finished. It does not mean deeply annotated, perfectly organized, or even ready to cite. And if that's your definition, then almost nothing you've touched will count, and you'll convince yourself you're starting from square one. And that's rarely true. Collected means this. At some point, you decided a source mattered enough to save it. And that decision already tells us something. So yes, articles sitting in your citation manager count. PDFs saved to a folder count. Sources you read for another course and thought, this might be useful someday, count. Even half-read articles count. Especially half-read articles count. Because half-read usually means something caught your attention, and that attention is data. Now, here's the part that people resist. Your memory does not count as collection. If an idea lives only in your head, it is not collected yet. Not because you're careless, but because memory lies under pressure. Oh, don't I know it? So when we talk about inventorying what you already have, we're talking about things that exist somewhere outside of your own brain. Things you can point to, things you can look at, and things you can think about and interrogate. That's the threshold. Now, let's connect this back to how we've been reading. Earlier, we practiced noticing claims, reasons, and evidence as we read. And that matters here because inventory is not about labeling topics. It's about noticing patterns in the kinds of sources you've been drawn to. So when you're inventorying, don't just ask where something belongs. Ask why it caught your attention in the first place. Did you save it because it confirmed something you already believed? Did you save it because it explained a mechanism you didn't understand yet? Did you save it because it felt important, even if you couldn't quite say why? Because all of that counts. Those reasons matter more than whether the article is fully read or not. Now, there are also things that feel like they should count, but they don't. At least not yet. A search you ran but didn't save anything from is not collected. A list of citations you meant to look at later but never touched is not collected. A vague sense of there's a lot out there on this topic is not collected. Those are precursors to collection, not collection itself. And that distinction matters because otherwise inventory becomes imaginary, and imaginary inventories don't support real analysis. Now, here's another important boundary. Notes count as collected material if, and only if, you can trace them back to a source. If you have notes to say, this study argues X, but you no longer know which study that was, that's not collected in a usable way yet. Now, that doesn't mean that notes are useless. It means they're unfinished. Part of inventorying is noticing where things are incomplete, not pretending they're done. This is also where people worry they're doing something wrong. Incomplete collection is normal at this stage. What's different now is that we're naming it instead of letting it quietly shape later decisions. Now, let's talk briefly about how this lands differently for people in this course. If you're a PhD student, what counts as collected starts to show you which conversations you've already been orbiting. You might realize that you've been saving work from a particular theoretical tradition without meaning to, or that you've avoided certain methodologies because they feel unfamiliar. That is useful information. Now, if you're an EDD student, what counts as collected often reveals what kinds of decisions you've been preparing to justify. You might notice that everything you've saved assumes resources your system doesn't have, or that most of your sources focus on outcomes without addressing implementation. Also, useful information. Same inventory, different implications. Now, let's talk about what we are absolutely not doing with this inventory. We are not ranking sources. We are not pruning yet. We are not deciding what stays in the review, and we are not evaluating quality. Because inventory is descriptive. It is not judgmental. It tells you what's on the table. Judgment is going to come next, and this is why the timing matters. Because if you define already collected too narrowly, you'll rush to collect more before you understand what you already have. If you define it too loosely, you won't be able to see patterns. The goal is visibility. Can you see what you've been drawn to? Can you see what kind of claims dominate your current set? Can you see where explanation is thin or absent? And if you can, your inventory is doing its job. One last thing, because this always comes up, and this is not about being efficient. This is about being honest, because you're not trying to impress anyone with how much you've already read. You're trying to understand the shape of your thinking before it hardens. That's professional work. So if you find yourself thinking, this doesn't feel like enough, pause. Enough for what? Enough to start collecting on purpose? Probably yes. Enough to start writing a literature review? Of course not. That's not where we are yet. So if you're unsure whether something counts as already collected, here's a simple test. Can you put your finger on it and say why it mattered to you at the time? If yes, it counts. If not, it's a signal, not a failure. That signal tells you what you need to pay attention to next. If this clarified the difference between having read things and having collected them, that matters. I appreciate you. I'll see you in the next one.